with regard to why is the legislature cutting funding, cutting funding, cutting funding? And so we're going to kind of go through the funding component to it, because at first glance, it was adding money not only to SPED above and beyond what currently is in the funding formula, but it was also adding to just that SGF. So we're going to start by going through an overview, and I'll just I'll allow, so if the House Chair would like to make a few comments or kind of kick it off, that's more than fine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would. It was startling to me to see an email that went out that said that we were, what was the term, Senator?
So it said public schools are under attack once again. Today, House Republicans passed their K through 12 budget. Once again, special ed was chopped, public school budgets were cut, and teachers and students won't be provided the resources they need. So let's just start with the simple. As I read it, 77.5 million additional dollars were going to special ed. Is that correct?
And let me add on, and then I think let's have Jennifer verify all of those items. But if we look at 387 and we compare with what was in the governor's recommendation, except for the children's cabinet, it's matched dollar for dollar, except we exceeded the governor's recommendation for special education funding, which was 77.5 above the 2025 consensus. But Jennifer will go over how those numbers could be construed as 82 million or 77.5, and she can do that. But I'm looking at it, and we have actuals from 2023 of state general fund, all of those areas, and it was 4.3 billion. This bill provides 4.5 billion, which is identical to the governor's recommendation. And then for 2025, then we add $4.9 billion. It is an increase. There is not a possible conceivable way to see a decrease. So that's clarification number one. In fact, I sent an email to our KLRD as well as KSD, and I asked, base aid per student continues to increase? Yes or no? Base aid goes from 5,088 to 5,381. I'm not aware of any pending legislation that would change current status. That is correct. I asked number two, were there any weightings that were reduced? I am not aware of any pending legislation that would change any of the student weightings in current law. And question number three about special education, adding 77.5 million next year is an increase. The response, an addition of 77.5 million above the fiscal year 2024 SPED state aid appropriation would be considered an increase. So just for the record, I think we should be honest about what this bill includes. It includes more funding, not less. There are consensus revenue estimates that do play into how those numbers are transferred year to year, but that is the only thing. And I think Chairwoman asked Jennifer to confirm that.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairs. Jennifer Light, KLRD. So as it stands currently in House Sub for Senate Bill 387, there is a change in the formula for excess costs. And without that change in formula, as it stands now, there is a $77.5 million increase in 2025. 70, and that's above the 25 consensus estimates. That was the 25 consensus estimates were 535 million, and then there is the 77.5, which is 75 million SGF, and then 2.5 million ARPA funds, which were for E-rate that are being moved to special education. That 75 million would only, as it stands currently in the bill, would only be included if the excess cost sections are passed by the governor. So there is a $77.5 million increase for fiscal year 2025 currently in the bill. That is above what we had in 24, which is 25. Was 535 for the consensus for 25.
Thank you very much. So if we could now, Nick, if you would just, let's just step our way through this.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Are you looking to begin with the budget or the policy provisions? Because Jenny will do the budget provisions, step you guys through the budget provisions, and I'll be happy to do the policy.
I know you have to leave, so let's start with the policy, please.
Thank you. So committee, Senate Bill 387, the House substitute for Senate Bill 387, makes appropriations to the State Department of Education for fiscal years 24, 25, and 26. And it would also enact, revise, and repeal various statutes relating to public education. So let's get started with those statutes relating to the K-12 public education and the revisions there too. The first thing that this bill would do, and this is in no particular order, new Section 4 of this bill would establish an education funding task force. This would consist of 11 voting members and 4 ex officio non-voting members. The 11 voting members would consist of 2 members from the House appointed by the Speaker, 1 member of the House appointed by the Minority Leader, 2 members of the Senate appointed by the President, 1 member of the Senate appointed by the Minority Leader, 1 member of the State Board of Education appointed by the State Board of Ed, 1 member who shall be a parent of a K-12 student who attends a school of a school district appointed by the Speaker, and 1 member who shall be a current or retired public school teacher who's appointed by the Senate President. And then lastly, Director of the Division of the Budget, and the Director of Special Education and Title Services at KSDE. Any one of those ex officio non-voting members can appoint a designee to attend meetings. This task force would be required to review the current school finance system, the current methods for determining and distributing special education state aid, and then the inputs and the outputs of the current funding system, academic reporting requirements, and the achievement goals established by the State Department of Education. This task force report would be required by January 11 of 2027, prior to the expiration of the KISA school finance formula. And the task force would be required to make recommendations for a new school finance formula to replace the expiring KISA formula. Whether revisions to the current methods for determining special education state aid are recommended, and then any other recommendations relating to school finance. Any questions on that, I'd be happy to take at the appropriate time.
Let's go ahead. Are there any questions at this time? Seeing none, let's move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. The next thing in relation to this task force is Senate Bill 387 would repeal the Special Education and Related Services Funding Task Force. This would take effect upon publication in the Kansas Register. So again, this would repeal KSA 723442, the Special Education and Related Services Funding Task Force. The third thing that the Senate Bill 387 does is it revises the how special education state aid and excess costs are determined under law. So Section 14 of Senate Bill 387 would amend the statewide special education excess cost calculation methodology to count a certain amount of local school district funding for special education funding within the state's total amount of excess costs calculation. There is, I could run through or provide a chart to run through the changes in the formula, but again, Madam Chairs, the primary revision to the excess cost formula is that it will count local option budget funding as part of the excess cost methodology. Section 5 of Senate Bill 387 would establish a new statute that would require that same excess cost determination methodology to be applied to each individual school district to determine each individual school district's excess costs. And it would state that if a school district is part of an interlocal or cooperative, the state board shall assign those costs based upon the costs that the school district pays to be a part of that agreement. Section 5 of this bill, in relation to that individual school district excess cost determination, would require the State Department of Ed to publish and submit a report on each individual school district's excess cost amounts. And this would be required to be submitted to the House Standing Committee on K-12 Education Budget and the Senate Standing Committee on Education. In conjunction with these special education formula changes, Section 16 of the bill would amend current law 725143 to require each school district to transfer the amount that school district raises in local option budget monies that's attributable to the special education weighting over to the school district special education fund. So again, local option budget money transferred, similar to at-risk and bilingual transfers. This would pertain to the special education monies that are raised through the local option budget. The last provision with regard to special education law changes is in Section 14 of this bill. It would also amend 723422 to require the State Board of Education to establish a special education state aid equalization distribution schedule, and then to distribute certain amounts of special education state aid pursuant to that equalization distribution schedule. This schedule must be developed by the state board in a way that provides for more equitable distribution of special education state aid based on the discrepancies between the excess costs of each school district. So they would use that individual school district excess cost determination and base this equalization distribution methodology on each individual school district's excess costs. So specifically, the amount of special education state aid that's appropriated in excess of the amount that was appropriated in fiscal year 24, so this is the $528 million, any amount in excess of that number shall be distributed to school districts pursuant to this equalization distribution schedule in each year. That $528 million would be required under this law to be appropriated and then distributed pursuant to the statutory distribution schedule that is currently in law. Only that excess amount above the $528 million would be distributed pursuant to the equalization distribution schedule. These changes would take effect on July 1 of 2024, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on the special education component, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions? Senator Sykes.
Thank you, and thank you for that explanation. So just a so 528. So currently, what SPED is getting in the school funding without the increase, that is tied to the previous formula, and then that addition of the 77.5 million is tied to these new provisions of funding. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Seeing none.
So next, I'm going to move into the provisions that relate to at-risk students and the at-risk student accountability plans, the at-risk fund expenditures, and an associated provision in relation to those at-risk changes. So new Section 6 of Senate Bill 387.
Actually, before you start that, so do you have a spreadsheet of where we currently are with at-risk and the changes? Is there a comparison? Yeah, we have another one. Great, thank you. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, this, if I can caveat what I'm passing out, and I'll make this available to members of the public as well. This is just almost like a bill brief for this bill. It doesn't provide a comparison since the Senate didn't have any particular at-risk provisions that I was aware of. Revising how at-risk funding was.
We didn't have provisions. I was just speaking to existing law.
Oh, yes, and I can go into that. So this should kind of cover those things.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you. Thank you for this. It's very helpful. So going back to my previous question on that special ed funding, so is section 3 on the memo, that's what is tied to that increase? Not like number 1, the education task force, or are all of those pieces tied?
So yes, that it is the changes that are encompassed in that section. Let me make sure my memo has all those changes. Yes. So in that section 3, that is what is currently tied to the special education increase amount, the contingency provision.
Thank you.
Not the task force. Yes.
No. But yes, only the special education statutory changes and the new special education enactment for individual school district excess costs are contingent upon the passage with the funding. So, Madam Chair, to continue on, I'm on section 4 regarding at risk. So the first major component of this bill, Senate Bill 387, is new section 6. This would establish a new statute to require school districts to show and report improvement in academic performance among certain student cohort groups. These cohort groups relate to students who are identified as eligible for at-risk educational programs. So under this provision, commencing in school year 24-25, so this following school year, each Board of Education would be required to submit and update as necessary an at-risk student accountability plan to the State Board of Education. You can see on page 6 of my memo the general purposes of these plans, but I'll get into the details and won't cover those right now. So again, in 24-25 school year, each school district would be required to identify at least one cohort group of students in grade 3 and one cohort group of students in kindergarten or any of the grades 1 through 8. One of those cohort groups must be a free lunch cohort group, unless there's too small of a number to comprise a cohort group, then another cohort group must be selected. So these cohort groups that are selected in grade 3 and then any of the grades K through 8 could include any cohort group used for state assessment purposes or any cohort group of students who are identified as eligible for at-risk programs and services under the same at-risk identification criteria. So once a school district identifies its 2 cohort groups in those separate grade levels, the Board of Education of the school district would be required to establish a 4-year quantitative academic improvement goal for each such cohort group in the areas of English, language arts, and mathematics. So to attain this goal, the school district would be required to identify and implement 2 to 4 targeted supports and interventions that are authorized on the State Board of Education's list of approved at-risk educational programs. And if these chosen targeted supports or interventions are not having a positive impact, the school district can select new interventions if necessary. Once a school district establishes each cohort group's improvement goal, the school district is then required to conduct a 4-year longitudinal evaluation of those cohort groups to determine whether each group meets or exceeds the goals after the 4-year period. To measure achievement and the achievement of the goals, the school district would be required to use the state assessment scores if those scores are available and the cohort group has taken those state ELA and math state assessments, and may choose another additional quantitative measure. If a cohort group will not take the state assessments, the school district can then choose either one or two other quantitative measures to evaluate progress. And these can only include the ELA and math assessments, a formative or summative assessment approved by the State Board of Education, or the ACT or ACT Work Keys assessment. So at the end of the 4-year evaluation period for each cohort group, no matter what, the school district would then be required to select new cohort groups at the applicable grade levels and begin the process over and begin with new cohort groups. If one of those cohort groups that the school district identified does not meet or exceed the school district's academic improvement goal after the 4-year period, the State Board of Education would be required to deem that school district as not meeting at-risk improvement requirements on the at-risk student achievement report for the school district and publish that on the state board's website. This designation would remain in place until the school district meets a goal for the applicable cohort group in a subsequent round. Additionally, if one of these groups does not meet its 4-year achievement goal, the bill would give school districts 1 more year to attempt to reach the established academic improvement goal. And if that 1 more year is not attained, if the goal is not attained in that 1 more year, the school district would then not receive the full amount of state aid that is attributable to the at-risk student weighting and the high-density at-risk student weighting for that following year. So if one cohort group fails to meet the goal after the 5th year, the school district would be determining their at-risk weighting and their high-density at-risk weighting using essentially the difference between the prior year's base aid and the new base aid divided by half. So they would get the prior year's base aid and then half of the increase to the following year's base aid amount. Maybe an easier way to put it would be if both cohort groups do not achieve the goal after 5 years, the school district would be using the prior year's base aid amount to determine their at-risk student weighting and their high-density at-risk student weighting, not the current year base aid amount. So essentially it removes the increase, the base aid increase from a school district for the at-risk and high-density at-risk weighting purposes.
So if you could pause there. So how many students need to be in a cohort?
That is not specified, but if there is a number less than 10, the school district needs to choose a cohort that they can report data on.
And the reason I ask that is, we have a growing population of school districts, or a growing number of school districts that have 200 students or fewer. So one school district we know this year has 19 students. That's the district. We have 10 school districts that have fewer than 100 students. We have 20 some that have fewer than 200 students. So when you start to look at what is truly the size of our smaller districts, our 1A districts, our 2A districts, it seems to me that you literally would not, it's potential that you would not have 10 kids at a grade level. So how do we accommodate for that?
Madam Chair, so one has to be free lunch, but if you don't have 10 kids that qualify for free lunch, then you would have to choose something else. But there is something that is common in all of our school districts, and that is not performing at proficient at grade level on the state math or ELA assessment. So I feel confident that just using that criteria, you could select a group of students based on that criteria in one grade or your whole school if you only had 19 kids. Certainly that would be a challenge if you only had 19 students in your school district. And so that may be something for modification. However, for the majority of our school districts, it is measurable and they do get to choose who is in that cohort and they get to choose every little parameter around it.
So this is to be over the course of 4 years, is that correct? So what do we do with mobility issues if 2 or 3 kids from a given cohort move out? How do we accommodate for that in this bill? Yeah, go ahead.
So the bill doesn't specify, but it does give the authority to the Kansas Department of Education to provide that role and regulatory guidance for this process. But the way that we talked about it in committee would simply be that if you would record that. If you had 30 kids in a cohort group and one moved away, you would note that you have now 29 students. Or if they no longer were receiving at-risk services, then you could still measure their growth and improvement. So those are how you would, and hopefully districts wouldn't be choosing the smallest number possible, which would be 10, because you can't have less than 10 because you just can't, because it's identifiable to the student potentially. So that's KSDE's policy or the State Board of Education's policy that they use online for reporting information. So we followed suit on that. So if they're going to choose one more, 11, that could be problematic for them if they fell to 9, but they would need to remedy it.
So my next questions have to do with, and committee members, okay, Senator Sykes, before we move on, we'll go to your question.
Okay, thank you. So I'm reading after that. So each school district would be required to continue the process of the cohorts until 75% of all students in the school district are scoring at a level 3 and 4 on both the English and math assessments. Is that correct?
So that is the State Board of Education's own goal that they have reported with the federal government. We're codifying it. So really the idea is, as long as you're not any school district that is at that point, they're exempt from this. So if you're not at that point, then you haven't reached the state board's own goal that is set to, is set until 2030. So yes, you should maintain this process over and over and over until you meet the state board's goal. But if you're there already, absolutely exempt yourself and consider this unnecessary.
So to follow up, because the different grade levels take those assessments. So is it based on like your 3rd grade and then 8th grade and 10th grade, or it is all grades? Like, are we determining that?
The bill specifies that if the state assessment is available, you are to use that. And that is to be the measurement to show that you have progressed. If it's not available to you, for example, if one of the cohort groups is selected and they're kindergartners for the first year, they're not going to take it. Not going to take it the first, not going to take it the second. They will take it the third. So they're going to have to use a summative or a formative assessment if it were those lower years that was approved by the state board or the Kansas Department of Education. That's what they would need. If it were for an older population, we include ACT as well, or the work keys.
So in looking at the actual at-risk student accountability plans, so I'm looking on pages 8 and 9 of the reviser's report. So I guess what I would like to hear from the House is we have 2 legislative post audits, the one from this last year and the one from 2019, that both clearly demonstrate that the way in which at-risk funding has been spent has been in violation of law. So tell me what in Senate Bill 387, what makes this different that's going to lead to school districts following the law? And what's different that's going to lead to the Department of Education enforcing them following the law?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in actuality, there's not the specific one single thing. It's more of moving in the direction of looking at real meaningful longitudinal data. What we learned this year is that when we requested from Kansas Department of Education that longitudinal reports be provided back to us, there was a misunderstanding of what that even meant. Longitudinal, from our perspective, means the evaluation of students over a period of time, and it's the same group of students over a period of time. For the KSDE or the state board, how they were providing it was just student data 1 year, next year, and so forth. So that clears that up. It also does provide a hook, which is we're giving you 4 years to find a goal, to meet that goal, use the evidence-based practices. And the State Board of Education has assured us that they are reducing the list of evidence-based practices or programs that are available for districts to choose from. If you recall from that list, the list was so broad that it even includes such vague things as discussion groups in class. And I have that list right here. So they're cleaning that list up. So that's one way to better monitor how are those funds being used. And that would be in conjunction with this bill and also the work that they are doing. Yes.
I'm going to stop right there because I think what was the most egregious seems a little too harsh, but what was the most obvious abuse of the at-risk funding is that if a particular school building had 40% of the students in the building were free or reduced, that is the percentage of at-risk funds that were used for teacher salaries as well as teacher benefits. So how does this block that continued abuse of what has been in statute for so many years?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't think it really addresses it. I do think what it does is put a more pointed focus on improvement so we can actually see improvement. And then we can actually see what are they using specifically, 2 to 4 targets of things that they're using specifically for those improvements. That may help us make a better determination of how those monies are being utilized. And that was our best shot at a little bit of accountability, as well as the clawback, and that you don't get your increase for 1 year if you can't use those evidence-based practices in a meaningful way that causes improvement, which you may be well aware, but those gaps between those that are below grade level are 25 points from the paid lunch students to the ones that are free lunch. That's 25 points. That can also be seen on the highest level too. And that gap is not reducing. So we keep adding more money, and the gap between the haves and have nots is not slimming down.
Well, I will just reiterate, it's because the funds aren't being used for above and beyond. They're being used for classroom teachers. And every child is expected to have a classroom teacher. And now it gets to the listing of what is an at-risk child. We added to that this year by adding foster children to that listing. But again, services have to be above and beyond a classroom teacher, and we just haven't seen that happen. So I guess, was there anything in testimony that came from the Department of Education that indicated this is how they would assure that the at-risk funds weren't going to be used for salaries for classroom teachers?
Madam Chair, and anyone else from our committee can respond on this as well. I don't recall any specifics. I will let the Senate know that we did go over the LCP annual reports Jennifer pulled at random, didn't ask her which ones, school districts. I think she's 5 school districts. And what we found, these are required by law right now, these reports. And what we found are a list of all kinds of things that districts say that they use for at-risk practices. But it looked like they threw everything in the kitchen sink into these reports, as well as inaccurate information. This one says that 2 to 5 grade reading improved from 70 to 87%. Frankly, there's not any school district that is that high at proficiency. So we just felt like, you know what, let's not waste our time with reports that aren't meaningful and helpful. Let's have reports that are very specific to student growth. And that's what we aim to do. But we did not get a specific answer to your question about how better to ensure kids receive the services that they need.
Okay, thank you. Committee, do you have additional questions? Senator Sykes.
Sorry, I have a question going back to the funding amount, and my apologies if this was already listed and I didn't. I know in the governor's budget recommendations, there was the mentor teacher program, the mental health pilot, the parallel assessments, and I think you talked about the things through the children's cabinet, like the child care capacity accelerator, rural child care, that those were not included, but did it include mentor teacher program, mental health, and the parallel assessments?
Yes, we included mentor teacher. There was a qualification for that for math and English language arts or dyslexia. We also included the professional development. We included the MHIT. We did not include an increase of $3 million. We maintained because there was an $800,000 carryover from, I believe, 2024. Jennifer can nod or not. It was approximately that. That was carried forward, so they didn't use all their funds. In addition, on the House side, there is a separate bill in which they were moving this out of the Department of Education, and so we just maintained it at that level.
So the increase was not added. What about the parallel state?
Parallel was not recommended by the State Board of Education, and so we did not include that. That was worked and passed through the Education Committee last year, and they had significant information regarding the safety of the program, and so we felt good about not requiring that.
Thank you for that clarification, and my apologies if it was already addressed.
It wasn't. Could you go through and share with us about the revisions you made with regard to open enrollment?
Yes, absolutely. And since Nick's not here, I will walk us through that. Oh, good. We've got Tamara here. So Tamara might want to talk about it. She does not want to. Okay, so let's just look at it really quick here. Let's start with the first one. Authorizing continued enrollment for certain students. Any non-resident student who was enrolled and attended a school district of non-resident during school year 2023-24 shall be permitted to continue. That looks the same. There we go. The next item was on yours, authority to deem students as not in good standing. We actually, the one difference from yours and ours on good standing is we move that provision to anybody that is applying for the lottery. So districts could have a policy as long as they had voted on that in their district board meeting, then they could have a policy to have a good standing for applicants as well. We also, there was one, yes, okay, you're good. There was one item on appeals that the Senate included, and we weren't 100% sure if it were lottery based only. We weren't sure why they might appeal. However, adding our language of a student in good standing would potentially give a reason for a parent to want to appeal if their student was excluded from the lottery because of policy about good standing. But we did, instead of having it go to the State Board of Education for that, we had them appeal at their own district level in a public setting. We thought that would be a little, because of time issues, in order to get the kids enrolled. Another change we made was the application. We felt the districts would have the ability, if they so desire, to have the applications open by January 1 and have a longer application process. That way, if a school district, the end dates were slightly adjusted, moved up a little bit, January 1. Oh, actually, I think that's 15th. Overall, the reason the application process was lengthened is if a district came to realize that they were very popular and they had many applications, they might want to consider in the April time span of looking for new teachers. And they could potentially do that. Then they are still, the same time is necessary for them to, in May 1, I believe, to make the determination of how many students that is maintained. It really just gives them more flexibility to make decisions on whether or not they want additional hires.
I appreciate that explanation. Is there,
I will add one more thing. It came
Okay.
from your area. There was a scenario that was given to us. It's a little confusing when you read it, but I'll explain it, and that may help ease any questions of why this language is so very similar but different. And that is, if you currently have a student that is in your district and they're attending your district, but they are planning to move out of the district, they also would still be allowed because they were attending the school the preceding school year, even though they are now going to be a non-resident district. They're moving out. And Tamara can maybe explain that a little bit better.
they'd be allowed what? So,
Yeah, any non-resident student who is enrolled in and attended a school district of residence during the 23-24 school year would be allowed to continue that enrollment even if they moved out of the district.
okay. Senator Sykes, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you. I was struggling with that. So that would not apply, like if there was a student who had received the option for open enrollment, but they decided to stay at their home school, that's not opening it up to where they were holding a space for a year. That was my concern.
So we had discussions about that, and this does not play into that one way or the other. A school district has to determine if someone's going to apply for a spot and go through the work of a lottery, they're probably going to choose to stay there. This scenario that we're giving is just that anybody that's attending that preceding school year, whether or not they were out of district, in district, moving to a different district, they still are eligible.
That helped clarify that. And I see that exempting virtual schools from open enrollment. Can you talk about that just a little bit? Why that was included?
Sure, absolutely. Virtual school students are a different population of students, and they choose that type, or their parents choose, or administrators choose that type of opportunity for them based on a variety of reasons. It is not for everyone, and therefore they do need to go through a different type of process of evaluating, is this a good fit for this student? And because of that, it's not a lottery. It's sitting down with their staff, administrator, parents, and for sure trying to understand, is this going to be best for the student? Because this is a different type of education where you're having to be self-motivated to get on the computer online and work.
So at this point in time, what additional components are there with regard to the bill?
Tamara, did you want to go ahead?
So the other components of the bill that are in the substitute bill include maintaining the state board's curriculum standards. So the bill would prohibit the state board from revising or updating the English language arts or math curriculum standards that are currently in effect until the state meets its long-term goal to have 75% of students score in performance levels 3 and 4 combined on those assessments. In addition, the bill also addresses the disposal of school buildings, that legislative option to purchase school buildings. The bill would define building as something that has been used as an attendance center. The bill would also authorize the LCC to deny the legislature's option to purchase a school building when the legislature is not in session. The bill would also exempt from the legislative option any building for which the school district did not receive any payment of capital improvement state aid for the acquisition, repair, or remodeling of the building. Additionally, the bill would prohibit a school district board of education from refusing to convey a school district building or property to a prospective buyer or lessee solely because that buyer or lessee intends to use the building or property for non-public school purposes. We already discussed the open enrollment provisions that are different. Then the bill also addresses virtual school state aid and KSHA virtual student participation. So with regard to KSHA participation, the bill would require KSHA to allow students to attend a virtual school to participate in KSHA activities in the student's residence school district, and it would prohibit KSHA from requiring any such student to enroll in or attend a minimum number of courses in that school district. To be eligible for participation, the virtual school student would have to meet all of the requirements that non-public school students currently have to meet as well. The bill would also address virtual school state aid to establish additional requirements for the determination of virtual school state aid for adult students and students who enroll as dropout diploma completion students. They would be funded on a per course completion basis. The bill would require the State Department of Education to determine the number of 1-hour credit courses reported to the Kansas Collection K-CAN report that students passed to meet minimum graduation requirements and validate course completions using official transcripts. The bill would maintain the same funding level for each such completed course, up to 6 courses per school year per student. And the bill would prohibit the state board from deducting any virtual state aid for those adult students or dropout diploma completion students for courses completed by such students in any school year that precedes the school year in which the state aid is determined. And then virtual school state aid would be determined based on an FTE full-time equivalent enrollment. And lastly, the bill makes renames the statutory reference to communities and schools to Spark Wheel. And I'll be happy to answer.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you. Tamara, can you tell me the difference between this change and determining virtual school state aid versus current law?
Yes, thank you. So the way that it works currently, and you can see this in section 15 of the bill, is for full-time students, it's the number of students multiplied by $5,600. And then for part-time students, it is their FTE multiplied by $2,800. And so this way, for all students, it would be the FTE multiplied by the $5,600.
Senator Erickson, do you have any questions? I am a little curious with the feedback during your hearings with regard to the at-risk funding. What was the feedback that you received with regard to the guidelines as far as implementation and the paperwork that would need to be provided?
So the original at-risk bill was more in-depth, and there were quite a few revisions. We did sit down with Frank and discuss those revisions, and Kansas Department of Education made specific requests to improve it. They believed that the list should stay. The original bill removed the list entirely, and they wanted the list along with provisional list to remain in the bill. they did indicate they were not in favor of removing any type of financial penalty. But other than that, that was pretty much it.
Did you receive any feedback from school districts with regard to students that are ranked from assessments to be in level 1? Did you receive any feedback about what services they were receiving if they were in level 1 to help them move out of level 1 into 2 and then into 3?
I don't believe we heard anything about the progress or improvement of students during the testimony.
So, did you ever receive any testimony indicating that when state assessments are performed in the springtime, so a child is identified in being in one of those levels, does that information go with the child as they're promoted to the next grade? And is anything put in place that you're aware of for that child? So let's say they're third grade, they're identified being in level 1 or maybe low level 2. The teacher would know that even before the assessment. But did you get any indication from any school districts about what they're doing when the child transitions from grade 3 and is promoted to grade 4? So what preparation is given for the teacher as far as identifying what level those kids are in that new class?
And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't, if anyone that may know otherwise, I don't recall any testimony that gave solutions or talked about improvements.
So since you had your hearings on this, because this just got, when did you vote this out of committee?
This was part of 387. We actually had hearings earlier in the year, so that would probably be early February. I'd have to double check. If Spencer were here, he could pull that up. But it didn't ultimately be worked until 2 weeks ago.
So in that time frame, did you get any feedback about some of the different components within the bill from school districts?
Not specifically about these different components, but what I will say is that we did, as I said, we've had conversations with the department about individual things that we could do to make it better, to make it more workable. We tried to incorporate many of those requests into it. And based on what school districts are currently doing, this would be an improvement in, because right now those LPA reports they're extensive. Nobody's auditing them. They're collecting them. And I don't know that they're actually benefiting or causing or helping improvement. And because we had a kind of a lengthy discussion on longitudinal and what that means, and making sure that we have data that's meaningful and that we measure things, and because that was extensive throughout many different meetings, this was our best attempt to actually put into practice good policies of targeted interventions. Less, instead of measuring every single person that may be at risk in your district, focus on 2 cohort groups and follow them over a period of time. I feel like that is one of the things that we've been trying to accomplish for the last 4 to 6 years, is actually following the measured improvement and having meaningful, targeted, evidence-based practices. And we haven't gotten there yet, but this might be a step in the right direction.
Any additional questions or statements? Seeing none, I appreciate this overview. This will give us some food for thought, and I guess we'll be in communication as to when our next meeting is. Thank you so much for those that attended. We are adjourned.